For those of you that were with us last week, you hopefully remember that we were talking about balance really being impacted upon by leg weakness and trunk weakness, but also that balance is quite a complex skill. And when we talked a little bit about motor relearning and skill acquisition, that you can actually, with practice, start to improve your balance. And that's what Balance Active's for. It's about actively standing and balancing. So the sort of activities you can actually undertake with Balance Active are all geared towards improving balance, but also about recruiting postural muscles and some of the leg muscles, because obviously you're in standing, and that will help counteract things like deconditioning. So obviously one of the first exercises you can do on Balance Active is literally just stand. And now if you imagine that you have had a stroke or you're really, really unsteady, just standing there on it, knowing that there's a knee block there that is actually going to prevent your legs giving way, is incredibly reassuring for some of these patients, and they can learn to stand. But really importantly, while they're actually standing there, they can start to sort of think about what can they feel, what does their body actually feel like, where can they kind of sense where the weight's going, can they sense what the feet are feeling like, what the joints are feeling like, can they sense whether they're upright or bent forward. So it can be a really useful tool to start to get that, just that basic standing. And you can then, once somebody's fairly comfortable standing, you can then start to progress to do other things. Now, one of the really useful things about Balance Active is it means you as the therapist are not having to actually hold them up or block their knee. They are standing, and it means you as the therapist can go to the side of them or even go behind them and actually observe how they're standing, whether they're symmetrical, where the weight's actually going. So that's really useful. Now, I just want to point out, and I hope you've noticed this, that these exercises are not in any hierarchical order. We've just put down a whole series of things that you can do. So it's not necessarily you just stand and then you'd stand and weight shift. They're not in that sort of order. But obviously, if you can remember last week as well, we were talking about people with stroke and the evidence for undertaking dynamic weight shifts post-stroke as a means of evidenced treatment to improve walking and gait speed. So you can stand and you can then start to shift your weight side to side. Really important as one of the elements of gait. It's one of the critical components of gait to be able to do that. You can stand and you can start to think about altering the base of support, and that could be by standing with your feet much closer together. You could have your feet much wider. You could stand asymmetrically. You could start to stand and go up onto your tiptoes, for example, making the base support really small, but you're also then actually bringing in some strengthening of things like your gastroc and your soleus. So you can do lots and lots of things with base of support. You can stand and start to incorporate upper limb activities. And again, if you think back to what we were talking about in terms of balance last week, when we were saying it's an anticipatory mechanism, so that if you decide you're going to move your arms, before you've moved your arms, your back muscles will activate in order to counteract moving your arms and shifting your base, your centre of mass forward. And so actually standing and doing lots of upper limb activities, be that raising your arms up above your head, is actually starting to be an early way of getting you to relearn some of those basic balance mechanisms. So you can do that. You can stand and turn your head, or stand and look over your shoulder, and that will start to stimulate some of the vestibular system. But it'll also start to be a very early way of getting a subtle weight shift without actually really having to shift your weight or consciously start to think about shifting your weight, but it will shift your weight. You can get people to reach, you can get them to reach forward, you can get them to reach laterally, and in doing so, really start to shift the centre of gravity, the centre of mass, right towards the edge of the base of support, depending on where you're trying to progress them. You can then start to do quite dynamic things on Balance Active that starts to bring in basic reactions, coordination, speed of movement. So things like throwing and catching, and we've got examples on videos of some of these. You can do stepping. You can get somebody to step back, step forward, which again is sort of progressing the lateral shifts. And then you can do more what you'd consider to be potentially more strengthening type activities, so things like small knee bends, although they are also targeting balance. They're starting to recruit quads and glutes and hamstrings and calf muscles, so you can start to strengthen doing that. But you could do that with a small weight in the hands, for example. And then some people have actually used it for dynamic stretching as well. So getting into a functional standing position and really standing upright to stretch things like the calf and to stretch things like the hip flexors. And there's a video showing that coming up. So it's really dependent on what that person's presenting with, where they're at in their treatment and what they need in order to challenge either their balance or their strengthening. So you can do all sorts of things. I don't know, do you want to add anything to that?
I think no, that's great.
Okay, next slide, please. So the next 3 slides that we're going to show you are actually videos. So they're just demonstrating really basic things. So here you'll see somebody standing on balance active and they're doing an upper limb movement. So this is where they are really having to recruit the postural muscles, so the back extensors. They're going to be recruiting the glutes. They're going to be recruiting around the ankle in order to counteract that upper limb movement. And it's an early way of starting to get some balance rehab going on. Now that could be progressed by using things like resistance band, or by using weights that are just put more force towards the front so that the centre of mass was being brought more forward. And there she's demonstrating, as we were saying before, turning the head, which is going to start to get the vestibular system activated, but also she's actually turning her whole body. So she's managing to get quite a significant weight shift on the leg towards where she's turning, which is really helpful in this way. Can we get a weight shift? Now, some patients would potentially start just by moving their eyes, or they might start just by a really subtle turn of the head, because even turning your head is going to start to shift your centre of mass. But that's just a demonstration of some of the sort of early exercises, but they're still dynamic and they're still active. She's actively having to stand and recruit those muscles in order to balance. The beauty of it is she's got that knee block that gives her the confidence that her leg is not going to give way as weight goes onto it. And again, you can get people to think as they're moving, what's that actually feeling like? Can you feel that weight shifting? Can you feel certain muscle groups starting to be activated? And that can be really helpful for people to then go away and start to visualise those movements when they're trying to train. Yeah, next slide, please. So the next one's another video. This is really demonstrating lateral weight shifts. So when that starts to play, you'll see she's really starting to shift her weight from side to side. Really important. As one of the critical components of gait, you've got to better get your weight onto one leg in order to swing the other leg forward. So it's a really good starting point and safe starting point. Now she's managing to shift her weight quite significantly from side to side, and she's just demonstrating how you could progress that to start to take one leg back. So she's almost doing a back step, but what you could get her to do is stop in that asymmetrical position. So she's in step stand, and see if she could balance there, and again get her to think about what does that feel like, where's the weight going, can you tell what can you feel through your feet, and progress that again. You could take that progression even further and have her in step stand and get her to turn, look over her shoulders, or move her upper limbs. It's dependent on what is needed.
And I think the beauty for us is that as therapists you can stand back and really appraise and scrutinise what is working, what's not, and give that feedback to be able to correct that, so that people are actually getting the feeling of what does good feel like, what does the correct position feel like, and so again, like Rachel says, it's the confidence, and absolutely
get them to then feedback to you
exactly how that, and observe the difference. So
okay, so the next one is actually quite an advanced activity. So this is where we're talking about reactive and being able to coordinate and rapidly move. So this is throwing and catching. So this would come later, but you'll see she uses a light touch support there because she shifted her weight so far back. She just corrected herself, which is a normal reaction. We talked last week about the different balance strategies we've got. She was demonstrating her upper limb strategy just to light touch, but she's maintaining that lovely upright position, and she is able to shift her weight and twist and turn. So that'd be a much more advanced activity, but you can kind of hopefully get a flavour of from quite early on basic standing with upper limb movement through to weight shifts, through to dynamic activity, just as a flavour for what you could do.